Well, good evening. Thank you for honoring me by being present. And we have a lot in this lesson, so we're going to get started right away with Joseph, Prince of Egypt. We're nearing the end of our study of the book of Genesis, and we're now with Joseph as he's now Prince of Egypt. We're going to look at how he rose and what occurs when he becomes Prince of Egypt. And of course, tonight he has encountered with his brothers as well. So we'll get right to it. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, this is our memory text. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." So Joseph, who's been through an awful lot, sold as a slave, he advanced to the head of the household, the chief steward, because of his faithfulness, because God was with him. And then because of a false accusation, he's sent to prison. But now, because he can interpret the king's dream, and it's an important one, he is made the grand vizier, as they say, the first ruler next only to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And that is why it's titled the Prince of Egypt. Definitely, it's a prototype of things to come, because this will happen again in the story of Daniel, who will become an interpreter of dreams and move up. And it will also happen in a different way in the case of Mordecai, who will become the second ruler in Persia. God likes to do this. I always say it's like a symphony. He makes a statement of a theme, and then he repeats it in a different key, or repeats it in a different mode, or somehow slightly different with variations. God is a great creator, and yet he does it in such a way that we can recognize his handiwork. That's a marvelous thing. And when he makes him, now we know the story. Joseph is in prison. He interprets the dreams of two fellow prisoners, both of whom promise to do something for him, but they forget until Pharaoh has the dream of the 7 cattle, the fat cattle and the skinny cattle. The skinny ones eat up the fat ones. The fat corn stalks or heads of wheat, and the skinny ones that eat up. And he interprets it. The God gives him the interpretation, which Joseph is very clear to make that it's God who's given him. And so Joseph is elevated to Prince of Egypt. And interestingly enough, Pharaoh calls him Zaphenath-Paneah, or Zaphenath-Paneah. And Zaphenath means God speaks. And Paneah means he lives or he supports life. It's very interesting because in one way, God speaks and he lives that is the ruler to whom the sons of the remaining sons of Jacob are sent. The ruler is Joseph. But think about it. There's a very ironic thing here, because God is speaking and he, Joseph, lives. They're sending him to him. God speaks, he lives. On the other hand, the alternative interpretation, God speaks or God is revealed and supports life, that's exactly what Joseph is doing. God has spoken to Pharaoh and then to Joseph to interpret the dream. And then he's going to use the understanding of this dream to support life, to prevent famine. So either way you cut it, either way you interpret this, it's a very ironic and a very meaningful name that Pharaoh is giving to Joseph at this point, as he is going to save not only Egypt, but many others from famine. It's interesting how this happens now, because we said that this is how he got to these positions. God supported him, but Joseph was also diligent. Proverbs says, if you see a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings. And Joseph is diligent, and he stands before Pharaoh. His master, that is Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Genesis 39:3. And then later, when he's in prison, the warden puts him in charge. This is a pattern in Joseph's life. The warden puts him in charge of everything to take care of the other prisoners. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. Why? He didn't need to. He knew that Joseph would be dependable. He knew that Joseph would be diligent. He knew he did not need to worry or be concerned about things which he had given Joseph to do. Joseph would do them faithfully because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. But he didn't just, when we say he gave him success isn't like it was just a handout, but he gave him success in whatever he did. His efforts were repaid with success. And so he was diligent in his efforts, and God was faithful to reward him. Now, this, of course, Proverbs is wisdom, but it also tells us that sometimes, or skeptical wisdom we find in Ecclesiastes, sometimes the farmer does all he can and the crop still fails. So there's that. But this time, in order to serve God's purpose, Joseph is rewarded with success at each step. There are other examples as well. Job, for example, has terrible things happen that are not because of his lack of diligence. But Joseph's rise to power comes. He is diligent, and God rewards that. And now, this is what Joseph says. Joseph doesn't say, here's the meaning of the dream, and you put me in charge. What he says is, here's the meaning of the dream, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. And this man should take 20% of the grain, and he should build storehouses and keep it. And then that's during the years of plenty. When the years of famine come, he can then redistribute this grain and save people from hunger. Well, Pharaoh and his advisors all listen in. They hear not only the interpretation of the dream, but they hear this plan. Here's somebody who not only sees the problem, but has a solution. It's a number of years ago, I was at the Adventist Communicators Convention, and they had a speaker there who talked about, do you want a better job? Do you want more money? Find a more difficult problem to solve. And that's a good thing for anybody. And that's what Joseph has done here. God has presented him with the prediction of a problem coming for Egypt, but it's also an opportunity for Joseph. And so Joseph says, here's how I would go about it. And Pharaoh says, hey, you're the man. You're the one that should do this. You see the problem, but you also see the solution. It's easy to fall into the habit of simply criticizing what is wrong. And people act as though that was some act of discernment. Most of the time, it isn't. Why do I say this? Because we live in a broken world. If we lived in a world where everything was perfect or nearly perfect, then finding faults might require some talent. But in a world that's so broken as the one we're in, finding fault is about the easiest thing to do. The question is finding the good things and emphasizing the good things. So we need to be aware of the problems. But we also need to be ones who find solutions if we can, and not just carp about problems. This is the great thing about Joseph. He doesn't just say, you got a real problem coming. You better do something about it. He's thought about it and said, here's what I think you should do about it. And Pharaoh says, sounds like a plan to me. So that's the next step. This is wonderful. And this is the thing about Joseph's rise to power. We saw this then in Potiphar's house. We saw it in prison. And we're going to see it under Pharaoh as he's interpreted Pharaoh's dream and comes up with this plan. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And that is a key to understanding this lesson and a key to understanding what's going to happen in history of the Jews and so forth. God is going to be with those who are diligent and who moves forward. Again, sometimes we have Job. Sometimes there are problems. Sometimes we have to have our faith tested in order to be built. But in general, and this is what Proverbs is about general, all things being equal, God will be with us. So we need to be diligent. We cannot control the outcomes, but we can to some degree control what we do about it. So because of this, Joseph is in charge. He accumulates all of this grain, and then the famine comes, just as God had told him it would, just as he told Pharaoh. And they come there and they want grain, but Joseph sees that they're his brothers. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And he says to them, "You're spies. You come to see our weaknesses, and you're spies." And they say, "We're not spies. We're not spies." And so he decides to put them in jail for a while to let them think about it. He wants to observe them and see what's happening. And here's what's happening in their lives. To their credit, they at least begin to see what happens. Then they said to one another, and the author of the lessons points out that's what they did when Joseph was coming. They were going to sell him. They said to one another, "Here he comes. Let's put him to death." Then they said to one another. So this is an echoing, a mirroring episode. They said to one another, "Truly, we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we did not listen. Therefore, this distress has come upon us." Now, this is sometimes called the law of retribution, and it is not always something that is carried out. But at least they had the wit to understand. This is what we put our brother through. So, we deserve this in a way, and that's the good news. We don't always get what we deserve. In his book, The Great Divorce, which is a parable, if you will, or an allegory, people have a chance to go to heaven for a day, and someone that they've had lived with here meets them and tries to convince them to come to heaven. One guy says, "Well, I just want my rights," and whoever's met him is somebody who he used to be in charge of, and he thought was a slacker. He says, "I want my rights. That's all I want." And the one sent to meet him says, "Well, no, it's nothing like that here. None of us gets what we deserve." And that's the good news about heaven. When we get to heaven, we don't get what we deserve. We get what Christ deserves. But here on this earth, sometimes we need to get what we deserve in order just to understand and to learn and to build our character. And so they're recognizing, what, this is what has happened. We deserve this because we put our brother through this. And that's progress. We talked about the fact that the rest of Genesis, at least one of the major concerns, is going to be who is going to be the vessel for the promise. We've had the vessel of Abram, we have Isaac, we have Jacob. Now there are 12 sons, 4 mothers. And who is going to be worthy to be the vessel of the promise? Now, all the 12 tribes will be a part of delivering that promise. But there still needs to be one. Eventually there will be a Messiah. They don't know that now. That's a growing understanding that grows throughout the Old Testament. But we know that someone has to take the lead, Oftentimes in democracies we have faith in committees, but that in committees usually 1 or 2 people actually do the work. Someone has to lead out. You build consensus. You don't just take over and dictate. But usually somebody has to do the work. And this is true of the promise too. Someone is going to have to come and do this. And again, this is a growing awareness throughout the Old Testament that it's going to take somebody. And we're already being prepared for it here to see which of these 12 sons of Jacob has character. And it could be more than one. And in fact, it will be. But it can be more than one. But there have to be some who are natural leaders, or those are spiritual leaders. There have to be some who will be more worthy and more able to carry out God's purposes. And that's what's happening here. We're going to begin to see how that takes place. And the first thing is that all 12 of them, or at least 11, Joseph already knows about this, but the 11 are becoming aware of the injustice that they have done. And that's, of course, the first step to growth, is understanding it. The brothers had sold Joseph into slavery and caused their father grief because of envy. The brothers are confronting that crime right now. They caused suffering to others as punishment for their own. In other words, we're angry. Our father Jacob is giving all his favoritism to our brother Joseph. That makes us feel bad. And so we're going to make Joseph feel bad. And as a corollary, it's going to make our father feel bad. But that's okay, because we're tired of suffering. We want to carry out. And this is This is what abusers always do. This is what I have done. That is to say, and I think we all have, I'm angry. I am upset because of how I've been treated. I want someone else to suffer. And so oftentimes it isn't the person even who has caused our problem. We just lash out at whoever's nearby. You know, we kick the dog, we yell at our wife, we do something we shouldn't do just because we're suffering. And that's so, it does us no credit to sit back and criticize the brothers of Joseph here. We've all done this to one degree or another. And so this is a key to understanding where they are, where they've come to. And that is, look at the difference between Reuben and Judah in this situation. When the time comes, because eventually Joseph sends his brothers home, sends the silver in their bags and so forth. They get home and they have food, but it doesn't last forever. And then Jacob says, we have to get more. We have to go back and buy more. Before he had sent them home the first time, Joseph had said, don't come back unless you bring your youngest brother. Because they told him about it. He questioned them closely. He wanted to know if his father was alive. He didn't say it in those terms, of course, but he found that out. And he found out about Benjamin. So he said, don't come back without it. And of course, Jacob doesn't want it. He says, I'm already missing Joseph. And of course, the key to this is that he really loved Rachel. This is clear. Jacob loved Rachel from the very beginning. And he's already lost Joseph in his own mind. He doesn't have Joseph anymore. And that was one of Rachel's sons, and the other son is Benjamin. He just can't lose the memory of his wife as embodied in these two sons. It's just too much for him. And he says exactly that. And but the boys say, we can't go back because we won't see his face. He won't even listen to us unless we bring Benjamin. And Reuben's solution to this is, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. It's an interesting notion. But you notice what Reuben has done. Well, we'll look at this in a second. What is Judah's solution? Now, these don't occur in the same time period, in the same chapter. Because what you're going to find is that they do go back. They take Benjamin. And of course, Benjamin, we have the whole thing with the silver cup being placed in Benjamin's bag. And now Benjamin is going to be enslaved. He's going to be put in prison and enslaved. And now Jacob's fears will come true as far as the boys are concerned, as far as his sons are concerned. They're not boys anymore. And so what happens? Judah's solution is this. Judah went up to Joseph and he said a lot, but he ends up with this appeal. Please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy. And let the boy return with his brothers. He's concerned about his father. He says so in the earlier remarks. It'll kill my father. He basically says exactly that. It'll kill my father if we don't allow my son. If we don't allow Benjamin, my brother, to go back. It'll just kill him. I can't have that. Instead of, I'm not going to let Benjamin suffer. Even if he's guilty, it looks like Benjamin's guilty, although they don't think he is. And I'm not going to let my father suffer. I will take their pain upon myself. And this demonstrates, because Reuben is the oldest, although he's already besmirched his record by taking his father's concubine, which in the final lesson we will see Jacob remembers and mentions this in Reuben's final blessing. When he blesses all the 12 boys, he talks about Reuben. He says, you did this one thing. So Reuben has showed that he's really not the leader. And here his answer is death to his own sons. Whereas Judah's answer is, I will take the suffering upon myself. And of course, it doesn't take a lot to see which of those is the more noble. Because we talked about the brothers had caused Joseph and their father to suffer because they were unhappy. Well, Reuben offers the death of his two sons if Benjamin does not return. whereas Judah offers himself as a prisoner so that Benjamin can return. So Reuben says, well, it'll happen if it doesn't, you can kill my son, which is not a good thing, no matter how you look at it. And Judah, when he finds out that that this is going to happen, he says, I'll be the slave. And this is what is a possible consequence. Well, I'll bring him back. So this will never happen. But Judah sees that this is really happening, and I'll take it. I'll take it upon myself. I would rather suffer than have my brother and my father suffer, especially my father. So Judah offers to take the suffering upon himself, but Reuben again offers the suffering of others. If I don't bring him back, make me suffer, but make my two sons are going to be killed. And of course, Jacob would lose grandsons. And you don't have to go far into the Old Testament to see that the great blessing, and we've said before, the whole idea of immortality in the Old Testament is largely about your children and your children's children. One of the promises God makes to people is that you will see your children and your children's children. And here, one of Jacob's children is offering the death of his children, the children's children. It's a terrible thing. Whereas Judah offers to take the suffering of which may have been earned by Benjamin upon himself. And don't forget that in the meantime, when they had this dinner, Benjamin gets 5 times as much food. Benjamin is pointedly shown favoritism by Joseph because he wants to see how his brothers have progressed, if they have progressed. And the fact that falsely accused, Benjamin is the one who's going to suffer, and Judah says, instead of saying just let him suffer, it's his problem, or let my dad suffer because he didn't raise his boy right, Judah says, I'll take his place. I'll take his place. Don't cause this grief upon my father. Don't cause this suffering upon my brother. And again, you can see the difference of the two situations. And here's something about leaders in general, because we're talking about who's going to be the leader, who's going to be the firstborn, who's going to be the one. And the tribe of Judah, of course, will eventually be the tribe through which the Messiah comes. Judah and Benjamin, interestingly enough, the one who was taken as prisoner, the one who accepted being prisoner, will be the royal tribes. Benjamin is the tribe of Saul, the first king. Judah is the tribe of David and the royal line after that. And when the two kingdoms are split, the 10 tribes go in the north, include all the tribes but Benjamin and Judah. And Benjamin and Judah are the kingdom of Judah. They're the ones who remain. They're the ones who return to Jerusalem. Everyone from Benjamin and Judah. So here you have Reuben versus Judah, and Reuben just demonstrates he's just not up to it. Leaders, and that's what we're talking about here again. Leaders take responsibility. Something goes wrong, leaders say, we have a problem. Not you have a problem, you did this wrong. You may hold an individual account privately, but publicly, he takes the heat. And they share credit. When things go right, they say, well, it took many of us. This was a cooperative effort. And congratulate these people. Manipulators take credit. Yes, I did it. I did it. I did it. You hear this a lot. You hear this in political speeches. Here's what I did. Here's what I did. Here's what I did. When you hear a politician talking about here's what I did in terms of all the good things, then you have a problem. Here's what we did is what a leader says. Manipulators take credit and place blame. So anything good I did, anything bad somebody else did. It's their problem. Okay, so this is what we see very commonly. Leaders take responsibility and share credit, share praise. Manipulators take credit. They make sure they get the credit, and they make sure they don't get the blame. They place blame. And that's a key to understanding what's happening here in this lesson and understanding life in general. Understanding why Judah, for example, is a better choice than Reuben, and why the tribe of Judah is going to be a better choice than the tribe of Reuben, because these things pass down genetically, and now I'm finding out epigenetically. So Judah is taking the role of the leader because he is accepting the punishment. He's moving forward to preserve his father by taking the blame. He's preserving the mission by taking the penalty. This is a sign of leadership. It's an important thing, and that's why I've highlighted it here. Now we're getting close to the end. And here is the end. It occurs here at the confrontation of Joseph with his brothers. It's going to occur after the death of his father in the next and final lesson as well, in a slightly different form. But he introduces himself as, I am Joseph, your brother. And of course, they suddenly are smitten with their guilt. He's released Judah and Benjamin. And he says to them, you sold me into Egypt, but God sent me. That's a fascinating way of putting it. You sold me, but God sent me. What is that? What is he trying to say here? Well, he's saying you were the instrument that made this happen, but God was going to send me. This was going to happen one way or another. God sent me here. You sold me, God sent me. As we'll see next week, he's going to say, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God had a purpose in this whole thing. And what this boils down to is another thing, and that is we all will serve God's purposes. We will either do it lovingly, voluntarily, eagerly, as his children, or we will do it as tools, not because he wants to use us as tools, but because we will become Satan's tools, and God even uses what Satan does against him, against Satan. So we will serve God, whether as sons and daughters or as tools. We might as well just accept that and recognize that and understand that rather than being a penalty, this is a marvelous opportunity to experience grace. That whatever happens to us, we can say, I want to be a part of God's purpose. God, help me to be a part of your purpose and see your purpose in what I'm suffering now. See your purpose so that even if I must suffer, it will be something which accomplishes your purpose. Now, I say this is hard to do. I wish I could say that I do this all the time, but I don't. Some things I'm no better than anybody else for sure. Sometimes bad things happen. I say, God, why are you doing this to me? Of course, the answer is that's not what's happening. What's happening is that my faith is being tested, or that sin is in the world and sin has this happen, or maybe it's the result of my own stupidity and my own brokenness that I've caused this and don't even realize it. It's not God doing it to me, but God will, whatever the cause, even if it's my own blunders that have led me to this, if I accept myself as God's child and say, okay, God, and I'm learning, but I'm getting old. It's taken a long time, but I'm learning to say, God, okay, I'm suffering. What do you want to teach me through this? What do you want to accomplish through my suffering? How can I be your servant, even as I suffer, or especially as I suffer, as I go through this? Every bit of suffering, as well as every bit of success, are opportunities to serve God or to serve ourselves. If we serve God, we will do so as sons and daughters. If we don't, we will serve him as tools. We'll get in the story of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Isn't this great Babylon I've built? He's celebrating. He could have said, thank you, Lord, for giving me this empire. But he doesn't. And so God, of course, gives him a chance to think about that for 7 years or whatever. So understand that we will serve God, whether as sons and daughters or as tools. And that's something that comes clear through all of this. Abram, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Joseph, none of them goes without suffering. And sometimes they serve as tools, and sometimes they serve as sons and daughters. And it's much more rewarding to serve as a son and daughter, to recognize that and allow the suffering to purify us and allow the suffering to ennoble us. I'm not very good at that, but I pray that God will help me get better at that. And that is Joseph, the Prince of Egypt. He's the Prince of Egypt, but he's still the son of Jacob and the loving son of that and the loving brother of all 11 of his brothers. We see, this may be something of an explanation of what Jesus says. When the Pharisees and others put him to death, they're torturing him to death. And he prays for mercy on them, saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Because they were serving God's purposes, but they weren't serving his children. And so their suffering will be all the greater in the end. And at that point, you begin to understand, barely, only in the smallest sense, how God can say, how Jesus could say, be merciful to them. They don't realize what they're doing to themselves. They don't realize the opportunity they're throwing away. They don't realize how deeply they're damaging themselves. So that's the final key for this lesson. We could go on and on, but we try to keep these down to just about a half an hour. So Joseph, Prince of Egypt, we have the three keys. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Joseph was serving God as a son continually. When he's confronted, when he's penalized by, or when he's tempted by Potiphar's wife, and eventually serves, in prison because he refuses. He says, "How can I sin? How can I do this thing and sin against God?" So he's in that moment, he's serving God as a son. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. If we serve God as sons and daughters, he will give us success when it is in our best interests, when it serves his purpose. But we will never be happier than when we're serving his purposes, even through suffering. It's hard to believe, it's hard to understand, it's hard to realize when we're in it, but that still is the fact. Leaders take responsibility and share credit. Manipulators take credit and place blame. This can be a guide to our own actions when we are serving God and recognize, okay, something bad happened. Can I take the blame for this? There's many stories I could tell about this, but time is lacking here. Manipulators take the credit. Oh yeah, we did this wonderful thing. But if there's any problems, blame so-and-so. And in all of this, we serve God, whether as sons and daughters or as tools. Well, thank you. We're almost at the end of Genesis. I just really want to thank you for being with me. You've listened to the end of this. Please, if you would, press the like button, or if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. Please share this. If it's beneficial to you, maybe others will benefit too. My hope is to help people understand how to study the Bible and to gain the most from these benefits so that we together may make not only this Bible journey, but make this a journey toward the sea of glass together. And the Lord willing, we will see each other in about a week. And until then, may he bless you. Thank you again for honoring me by being present.